Determine the left-sided limit and the right-sided limit, and the two-sided limit as x approaches 2 of x squared minus 7 divided by 10 minus 3x minus x squared. Each of these involves the limit as x approaches 2, x squared minus 7 divided by 10 minus 3x minus x squared. The first thing to do is try plugging a 2 in for each of the x's. That will give 2 squared minus 7 divided by 10 minus 3 times 2 minus 2 squared. 2 squared is 4 minus 7 divided by 10 minus 3 times 2 is a minus 6, and minus a 2 squared is a 4. The minus is not part of the square. It's outside of it. 4 minus 7 is a negative 3. 10 minus 6 is a 4, minus 4 is a 0. That 0 in the denominator is not actually a 0, since x is only approaching 2 here, it doesn't reach a 2. But the limit result of a non-zero number divided by 0 is equal to positive infinity or negative infinity, and the sign of the infinity often depends on the side the limit is approaching from. Therefore, we will have to work out each of the one-sided limits separately. We have the left-sided limit indicated by the negative superscript on the 2. And the right-sided limit indicated by the positive superscript on the 2. Let's start with the left-sided limit. The first thing to do is to factor the denominator so that we can see the factor in the denominator that's making the 0. The denominator is a trinomial quadratic, though the square term is negative. To make the factoring a little easier, it may be a good idea to factor a negative out of there first. If we factor a negative out of there, the x squared term will become positive. I'll write that first. The 3x term will become positive. I'll write that second. The 10 will become negative. I'll write that third. That should make it a little easier for the trinomial factoring to take place. The numerator can be left alone. In the denominator we have a negative, and then trinomial factor into x and x. We need two numbers that multiply to be a negative 10 and add to be a positive 3. It sounds like positive 5 and negative 2 will take care of that. The term in the denominator that's making a 0 as x approaches 2 is the x minus 2 term. This is the left-sided limit. The left side of 2 is less positive than 2, like 1.99. And if you put that into the x minus 2 factor and subtract 2 from 1.99, you get a negative number. It's going to approach to 0, though, so it will be a negative 0 that we replace in for x minus 2. All other x's, we can just place a value of 2 in for them. So this will equal to, in the numerator, 2 squared minus 7. In the denominator, a negative, a 2 plus 5, and then the x minus 2 factor becomes a negative 0 because it's approaching from the left side. In the numerator, 2 squared is 4, then minus 7. In the denominator, negative 2 plus 5, which is a 7, and then times negative 0. 4 minus 7 is a negative 3 divided by a negative 7 times a negative 0. Negative times negative is positive. 7 times 0 is 0. A negative divided by a positive is a negative. A non-zero divided by 0 is an infinity. And there's the result of the left-sided limit. The right-sided limit will work out in a similar fashion. The factoring will be the same. Leave the numerator alone. Factor a negative out of the denominator. The denominator can now be factored through trinomial factoring into the x plus 5 and x minus 2. The factor that's making 0 in the denominator is the x minus 2. This is the right-sided limit, and it's approaching 2 from the right side, which means it's more positive than 2, like 2.01. If that's plugged in for x, 2.01 minus 2 will be a positive number. But it's going to approach to 0, so it will be a positive 0 that we replace x minus 2 with. All other x's can be replaced with a 2. So this will give 2 squared minus 7 divided by a negative of 2 plus 5, and then times what will be a positive 0 as x approaches 2 from the positive side. 2 squared is a 4 minus 7 divided by a negative of 2 plus 5, which is a 7, times a positive 0. 4 minus 7 is a negative 3, divided by a negative times a positive is a negative, and 7 times 0 is a 0. A negative over a negative is a positive, a non-zero over 0 is an infinity, and there's the result of the right-sided limit. The two-sided limit depends on the results of the two one-sided limits. Since they do not match each other here, the two-sided limit up above will be does not exist. And there's the results of each of the one-sided limits and the two-sided limit.